There's no way that you can manage a company like this if you don't understand what your employees are going through. You can never manage what you can't measure. There's multiple times that we probably walked away from multi-million-dollar deals because it just wasn't the right opportunity, and other people would have taken it at the the detriment of their employees and having higher loss claims on insurances. One of the things about the waste and recycling industry is at one point it was like the third most deadliest job in the United States. And my job every day, I looked at it as the owner of the company, was to make sure that everybody went home alive, because we had a very, very hard work environment.
Our guest today is Jason Leck, former president and owner of Leck Waste Services, which was a third-generation family business founded in 1971 and built into one of southeastern Pennsylvania's most trusted waste and recycling companies. Jason started in the business at the age of 12 on the back of recycling trucks, which I am excited to hear about. I have a 12-year-old, so maybe we need to put her to work on some recycling trucks. He worked his way through the field operations, went on to help lead the company through decades of growth before its sale to Republic Services in late 2025. Along the way, Leck grew to more than 100 employees and a fleet of about 90 trucks, and their reputation was really for reliability, customer focus, and operational excellence. Jason also serves as secretary and treasurer of the Pennsylvania Independent Waste Haulers Association, which gives him a front row seat to the realities facing family-owned businesses in this arena. So, Jason, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
So tell me a little bit about your kind of origin story in the business. I mean, you literally started preteen in the business all the way up through it. Tell me about that.
I come from a very blue-collar background from my family. My grandfather and my father are extremely hardworking individuals. And, the expectation in our family was that, when you were old enough to work, you were going to work. And my brother and I actually laugh a lot about it because, I can remember being like 11 and 12 years old on a Saturday and my dad coming at 5 o'clock in the morning, kicking on the door and saying, "Come on, it's time to go to work." And, then I hated it, right? But it also kind of set a foundation in me that I would say that, nothing in life that is worth anything comes easy. You got to go after it and go get it, right? So sitting here now in my 40s, I'm appreciative for the hard work that my dad and my grandfather instilled into me like that. But at the time, I didn't appreciate it. But, at 12, yes, I was on a recycling truck working on the weekends. And then when everybody else was going to the shore in the summer times and having fun, I was on the back of a garbage truck picking up trash, all the way through college. I drove a truck for the family business through college, and then ended up going. I went to the University of Rhode Island. I graduated and came back, and with the intention of trying to help take over the family business. And my dad said, "You're not done driving yet. You have to go into the field and prove yourself, because there's no way that you can manage a company like this if you don't understand what your employees are going through." So I actually had graduated with my degree, came back, and I literally drove a trash truck for probably another 6 to 7 years before I moved into like operations and, being in charge of some of the crews and stuff like that. And then ultimately from there, I kind of worked my way up. I became the vice president. I was the vice president for a while. And then I would say probably 10 years ago, maybe moved into more of like the president role. My father was still, owner, and he was the founder and CEO. So, I was kind of went through every stage of the business, working literally as a kid all the way up till the exit, basically. So.
Did you chafe at all? I mean, 6 or 7 years, right? You go to college, you think, I'm going to come in and I'm going to help. What did you study in college?
I went and got my business degree. I minored in finance. So
okay, so you're thinking like, I have something to give here, and your dad's like, no, go drive a truck.
Yeah, I'll say at the time I didn't see the benefit to that. But what I would say is, we're in a very hard industry that there's a lot of wholesome, great people. And they will, if given the opportunity, they will chew you up and spit you out if they think that you're fake or if you're not real, right? So they're hardworking people, and they're the salt of the earth. But they also, pardon my French, they can see through bullshit real fast, right? So they would never really truly respect you if you weren't able to do the job that they were doing, right? So I'm appreciative actually that I got it. I mean, at the time, yes, it kind of felt like I wasted 4 years of my life going to college and then coming back to actually learn. But I also learned a lot of the skills, and I think it made me a better owner and better president of the company because I never made decisions about growth that would negatively impact the people that were performing the actual duties and services to our customers. So there were plenty of times where I'd have managers who would say, well, we could do it this way cheaper. And I would refuse to do that because I knew what the impact of that was onto the people that were working for us and how it actually impacted our employees.
When you look back now at that time, just kind of being down in the daily operations, running a truck, what did you learn there that might not have been obvious at the time that helped you out later?
That's a great question. I would say it was probably more about just being dependable, right? Because the entire team relies on you being there every day to get your piece of the actual daily work done. And a lot of what we did with, for collections and whatnot is based around scheduling. So there's not a lot of room. And when you're trying to be profitable and you're trying to deliver on a service that you're telling customers that you're going to be there on a certain time, you have to be able to control those logistics. And I think the one thing that it taught me was time management and scheduling really, really, really well. So yeah, that's the one thing I would say I probably learned from it.
Do you feel like your time in the field made you less tolerant of unreliable people?
Correct.
And inconsistent people
Yeah.
when they wouldn't show up? You're like, no, I've been there. I've
Yeah.
lived it. And
No,
you're
absolutely. And I think the other thing it also did is it allowed me to see through, I would call the employee fog, where they would try to tell me that, 1 and 1 didn't add up to 2. It was 5 or something like that. I'd be like, no, I did that. I understand how the process works, and you're not doing it properly. So
You're like,
yeah.
you're slow on that route. You're
Correct,
like, well,
yeah.
we can only do so many houses at a time. And you're like, no,
Correct.
thank you.
Yeah, correct. So, yeah, I think, and listen, I'm not saying that it's the path for everybody. I think for me, it allowed me to be successful. It allowed me, I probably could have been more profitable, maybe not doing it, but then it would have come at the cost of having a good culture in my company as well. Because I think the one thing that we had that, I mean, you got to remember, we're in the waste industry. People don't talk about culture in the waste industry. Most people think of it as a job. I mean, we had lifelong career employees at the company. I mean, multiple employees that were, 20 to 25 years. I'm going to say 10 to 15 of those. Maybe 15 to 20 employees that were 15 years. But we also had a couple employees that were 35 and one that retired at 48 years with the company, right? So like, you don't build a workforce in that industry that's a really tough industry and keep people without a strong culture. And I think the one thing that it taught me being out on the routes and doing all that kind of stuff was to treat your people right, and they'll take care of your customers.
What would you say to, I have a couple clients who are in more of the blue collar space, right? And turning over, people jumping ship for $1 an hour more or whatnot. When you talk about culture and retention, what are some ways that you poured into that space where maybe you couldn't compete on paying them the highest, but you could compete on things that would retain them? What did you do?
So I did this really cool thing, and I did it a lot leading up, probably to the 3 or 4 years leading up into COVID. But then after COVID, it kind of fell a little bit by the wayside just because people, weren't getting together in person. But I did it twice a month where I would send out handwritten personal invitations to 4 people from the company to go have dinner with me right after work at like 4:30 every day, or when we would meet. And I would do it one person from each of a different department. And the point of the actual meeting was we weren't allowed to talk about work. There was no work conversations that had, at that dinner. I'm not saying that sometimes it wouldn't seep in, but I would moderate it. And I'd say, guys, we're not going to talk about that. I'm here to learn a little bit about you. Like, I want to learn about your family. Tell me about your kids. Tell me about, what you love doing when you're not at work. And it was weird because when I very first started doing it, like maybe like the first 4 or 5 times, the response just was like, it was like talking to a wall. I couldn't get anything out of it because I think people were just trying to figure out what the MO was. And then slowly people were like, no, you don't understand. It's the owner of the company. He's just taking me, this blue collar guy, to dinner. And he didn't want to talk about work. He was literally asking me how my kids were doing in school and, what I like doing on the weekends when I'm not there, what my hobbies are. And he really just cared about me, not necessarily about, what's profitable for the business. And I think the cool thing that happened with the culture shift there was that employees started looking at me as like part of, like, I always looked at them as part of our family because we were a family business. But I think they started to look at my family and say, like, these guys are different. There's a reason that I would stay here and work because like they actually are truly invested. Now, listen, is that going to be across 100% of the employee base? No, you're not going to reach everybody. But what I can tell you is we had great tenured employees that, you know, in our industry, you know, if you can keep somebody 2 years, that's a huge deal. Where, you know, and I probably had 30 to 40% of my workforce that was there 15 years plus, you know. So I mean, it was a huge thing. You know, and listen, like, you know, we'll talk probably a little bit about like how we exited and whatnot, but like, you know, I had grown men that were in tears in my office when we sold because they just, the relationships that we built went deeper than just a job and a paycheck. So,
yeah. Tell me about, you were talking before the show about some inflection points that the business went through, you know, as you first tell me a little bit about that transition you had to go through, stepping from, I'm part of the team, I'm one of you guys, into now I have to lead and manage. And sometimes I'm going to have to make decisions that might not feel great to you, but are in the best interest of the business. Tell me about that mental transition you had to go through.
yeah, I think the hardest part of that is probably, you know, when you're on the other side of it, you have to start looking at profitability, right? You know, like when you're just trying to deliver on something, you're just trying to get it done versus when you're, you know, managing it, you're trying to look at, you know, KPIs and say like, are we profitable, right? So I think the hardest thing probably would be I was managing from a standpoint that I would never send anybody to do something that I myself wasn't willing to do, right? So there were times where that got in the way of growth initiatives because, listen, and again, we're going to laugh because like, I'm in the waste industry, right? But like we didn't just do municipal waste, we did liquid solid waste. And there's some really nasty things out there that like, you know, you couldn't pay people enough to do. Or if you're going to do it, you have to make sure that you're really, really compensating them, right? So what I would say is there was times where like the shift was going from the field versus going into, you know, the management is making sure that you're profitable. And then also just setting your people up so that they want to come to work and they're willing to do the jobs that you're trying to bid on and stuff like that. So that became difficult because you still have to relate, and you have to relate on both sides, you know, on the management side plus on the worker personnel side.
Does anything specific come to mind, a time where you were like, I wouldn't tell them to do things I wouldn't want to do, and so maybe that hampered your growth? You kind of led into that. Is there something specific that sticks out?
I mean, a couple times we, you know, and again, I would, without talking bad about developers or anything like that, like I think people develop, you know, properties and stuff, and the last thing they think of is like how we're going to manage our waste, right? It's not on the front of anybody's brain, but
small priority.
The truth of the matter is that like, you know, if you don't want, you know, rats and stuff like that, you have to plan for all that kind of stuff. So a lot of times we ended up being, you know, in my mind, to the opinion of, you know, some property managers and stuff, kind of like they treated us like second-class citizens, right? So like there were times where we had, you know, multi-million-dollar opportunities where they just wanted us to do things that, you know, and again, in ideal weather, maybe it doesn't matter, but like, you know, if it's a rainy day or if it's a snowy day or if it's a 110-degree day, you know, there's situations you just don't want to put your people in. And yeah, there's multiple times that we probably walked away from multi-million-dollar deals because it just wasn't the right opportunity. And other people would have taken it at the, you know, the detriment of their employees and, you know, having higher loss claims on insurances and stuff like that. So, I mean, my goal always was, you know, as the owner of the business, one of the things about the waste and recycling industry is at one point it was like the third most deadliest job in the United States, and it's still within the top 10, but I think it fell to like the fifth or something like that. But like, you know, it's right below Alaskan king crab fishermen, right?
Why is it so dangerous?
A lot of accidents where, you know, workers are working in the street and somebody's driving and not paying attention, and a lot of workers are killed that way, right? So my goal always, like our number one core value, we had 12 core values, but our number one was always safety. And my job every day, I looked at it as the owner of the company, was to make sure that everybody went home alive, because we had a very, very hard work environment, you know, for just, you know, I think you take for granted, like if you go to work every day, and even if you're an owner of a blue collar business, you're sitting in your office and you have air conditioning and you have heat, right? So if you look at a waste and recycling collector, if it's snowing, they're working in the snow. If it's raining, they're working in the rain. And as stupid as this even sounds, is like you have the luxury, if you're working in the office, to be like, I have to go to the bathroom. Like you just walk up and go to the
Right.
bathroom. If you're driving a truck and you're picking up on a route and you have to go to the bathroom, what do you do? Right. So like a lot of people don't think about
What
that.
do you do?
Well,
Do you pee in a bottle?
I don't want to talk about it. No, like, so you have to break route and, then that looks at productivity and all that kind of stuff. But people are human, right? So you take for granted if you're sitting at your desk that you just get up and go to use the restroom. And I know that sounds stupid, but like, if you've never ran a route, like I said, like my dad had made me do, if I was just looking at productivity on an Excel spreadsheet about how, a route was being operated or whatnot, you can't take into consideration that someone says, I had to go to the bathroom. I had to break route and I had to drive 3 miles to go find a public restroom or something to be able to use. And then I had to leave there and go back on route because I had to go to the bathroom, right? So I would say someone that's never done it before wouldn't appreciate that, wouldn't understand that, right? So I know that sounds maybe very minimal, but
I feel like there's so many things that when you look at a business high level, you're like, oh, we can optimize for all these things, and then you forget those
little things,
those little human things,
yes,
right?
correct,
Where it's like, well, this is the reality of it. So that was one inflection point for you, was moving from one of the guys to now I have to look at profitability and make more strategic decisions. Tell me about the inflection point for the business. You originally divested a portion of the business on a push for growth. Tell me about the divestiture. When did you guys start thinking about this? Kind of where did this idea come from?
So one of the reasons that we met is I joined Vistage very early on. I was probably like 33 when I joined. I was clearly one of the youngest members. And one of the things that my father and my grandfather did is they built a great foundation, a solid company, but a lot of that was through hard work, and they weren't really number guys. They were more like, hey, did we make money at the end of the year? Are we going to take a paycheck? And that kind of stuff. I would say that, I don't think that that's uncommon even for a lot of small businesses, because I think most of your small businesses probably get to a certain revenue number and then they're unable to scale because they don't start looking at other things, right? So I had gotten involved with Vistage early on in my career, maybe like 10 years after graduating college. And I had noticed that around the room, the guys that really did it well really looked at key metrics and they really understood their numbers. It wasn't necessarily that, they were better than anybody else, but if you asked them a specific question, they could tell you exactly what that meant, right? So I kind of took a step back and said, like, I want to really professionalize this. I feel like we're a family business, and there's nothing wrong with being a family business. You can be a professional family business, right? Obviously I think when we sold, we were somewhere around 125 employees. We were still a family business. At the end of the day, my dad, my mom, my brother, my wife, my grandmother, they all worked there, right? So, but I wanted to professionalize it, and I basically said, okay, we have to bring in people that are smarter than the family. Right. So I had to bring in a CFO. I had to bring in a COO. I had to bring in general managers. And I did that from a standpoint of trying to remove myself from the weeds a little bit to start really understanding some of those metrics and start measuring some of those metrics in order to be more profitable. And, I think that was probably, and again, I don't keep going back to the people or what made us what it was. I think, people surrounded us because of the culture that we built, but we were able to attract great people who brought in skill sets that probably wouldn't have typically worked at a smaller business because they were probably way more qualified, but they kind of liked what they were doing. And then that allowed me to basically start looking at certain things that the family wasn't doing before, and allowed me to look at the fact that there was a portion of our business that was very unprofitable, but that it was stable cash flow. So it was cash flow coming in every month. But at the end of the day, we were probably lucky to be netting at the end of the year 2% on that money. So it was a huge portion of money. It was a couple $1 million a year. Yeah. But at the end of the day, the juice really wasn't worth the squeeze. And it was probably like 80% of our headaches as a business. So at the time, I looked at it and said, there's other companies that really thrive in this space. We should probably spin this off because it's not what we're really, really good at. So in 2014, we spun probably about a quarter of the business off, and basically took that money over the next 10 years to quadruple the size of the company. So in 10 years, we were averaging there were years that we were hitting 30% growth rate, but there were years, the overall average was right around like 19% growth year over year if you averaged it out over those 10 years. But we literally quadrupled the size of the company, went, from one site to 3 sites, and we were operating in 3 states, So, and I wouldn't have been able to do that had I not had the professionalized people around me to able to show me the metrics and to be able to show me, that information that I don't know that we had before.
So I'm going to back up. Is it okay if we dig into some numbers a little bit?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so timeline-wise, you graduated with a degree in finance, business finance, right?
Yeah.
And then you came out and you spent, so you're 22-ish, you spent 6 years on a truck riding a route. You start moving up into management, late 20s, early 30s. Kind of early 30s, you join a Vistage group, and that's when you start thinking, I really should know my numbers. And then you move into this. Like, what time frame was this prior to 2014, would you say?
So I graduated in college in 99. I was on the truck until like 2007, 2008. Yeah, so I'm going to say it was like 2009, 2010 that I really started to walk that path. And I found out pretty quickly within like 2 or 3 years that like we were unprofitable. So then I said, okay, well, what's the process of trying to, take this and divest it and get rid of some of the headaches and try to scale it, right? So, I probably recognized it in 2010 and then, started to put a plan in motion through the help of some of the guys that were in the Vistage that, kind of put a tiger team around me and, we came up with a plan and we started marketing it probably in 2012. And that probably took us until September of 2014 to get it sold. So.
How long did it take you from when you said, oh, man, I need to bring in somebody to look at the finances? And this is something that I'll often ask my clients, we'll rate their leadership teams, like scale of 1 to 10, how are people doing? Quantify that problem, right? And one time, one of my clients was like, I don't have a strong finance person. And I said, well, quantify what that means in terms of money to the business. And he's like, probably a couple $1 million. I was like, what? And he goes, yeah, I should be doing like segregation studies on each of our product lines to know what's the most profitable, what's not the most profitable. He said, we're probably doing work, probably like millions of dollars of work that's not profitable. Yeah. But I don't have access to the numbers to make that decision, right? So how long did it take you from bringing on your financial person to feeling like you had clarity on the numbers by the different products?
That's a great question. What I would say is I really lucked out. I found a CFO that was working for literally $1 billion corporation that was at a point of her career that she wanted quality of life versus,
versus $1 billion corporation.
Yeah, she just didn't want the money anymore. She wanted quality of life. And, she came in and hit the ground running. And within like 2 months, I knew that she was a rock star. Right. And she was the godsend. And, Kath, if you're listening, I got your back.
Shout out.
Shout out to Kathy. Right. But, I think you can make, if you get the right person. Now, listen, I've also talked to people in my group and in the industry that have hired the wrong person, and sometimes they don't figure that out right away. I think you usually know someone's true colors within 60 days. And one of the things that I took from an early member of one of my advisory groups was hire slow and fire fast, right? So if it takes you 6 months to hire the right person, get the right person. But if they're not performing, get rid of them even faster, right? So, she was able to provide me information very rapidly, very quickly that was able to scale. And I think the thing that's even probably scarier now, I mean, I'm talking, this is 12 years ago or 10 years ago at this point. With the way AI is moving forward, some of the information that she would be providing me, even like towards the end of the sale, I was running through certain chats and stuff like that, and able to scrape numbers even quicker and even faster than she could provide it for me. So I think the tools are there now for somebody that doesn't have either the budget or whatever for a full-time CFO to be able to get it, as long as you're recording some of your finances and recording certain metrics, basically.
Yeah, so, I would understand that. So. Yeah. Okay, so you bring your CFO in. Through that exercise and getting a handle on your numbers, you're able to determine you have this one business line that's barely, marginally profitable.
Yeah.
What before you stepped into leadership, do you know what kind of business, like margin, the business was running at each year on average?
I didn't, because being being in the field, it didn't really matter. What I can tell you is what I had found out afterwards. If we were having a great year overall, the whole business was probably making about 7 to 8%, which most people wouldn't even get out of bed for 7 or 8%. But a lot of that had to do with the one portion of the business that was very low margin, right? So like once we kind of got rid of that, it kind of doubled overnight. It went to 15%, right? So
Where was your revenue at when you made this divestiture?
so we were right around a $10 million corporation.
So 10 million at like 7% on average.
Yeah.
And then how much of the business did you divest?
It was about $3 million worth of revenue. So we went from like a 10 million down to about a $7 million corporation.
But at like 15%.
Yes, at 15%.
It's interesting because I have a company right around those numbers. Same thing. They're like, we did 10 million, then we divested the not profitable, and we did 9 million the next year, but made more money.
Yeah. So, listen, we took that money, we serviced debt that we had, and we basically wiped the slate clean. And we basically then in 10 years went on the profitable side of the business, was able to go from a $7 million corporation to a $30 million corporation. And in addition to that, that was just the one corporation. We had started 6 other companies, right? So there was a lot of other companies that surrounded that main company. So the portfolio of businesses and the opportunity that it provided for us to scale, creating the real estate companies and the holding companies that were around it and some of the other stuff, it was a life-changing experience from a standpoint of getting rid of the unprofitable part of the business,
Did you have to get rid of employees when you divested?
We did.
How many did you?
I'm going to say it was somewhere around 15 at the time. It wasn't, because it went with the acquisition, basically. The purchaser wanted the employees to be able to do what they were doing.
What was the line of business?
It was the residential household collection.
Okay.
Very low margin. But listen, it's good. I'll tell you, sometimes you have to be careful about you doing your SWOT analysis, right? So when we start talking about, your exit strategy and all that kind of stuff, one of the things that I didn't take into consideration with SWOT analysis under the threats was that a world pandemic would happen, and
offices would shut down, and there
was no need for commercial collection. So the commercial was the very profitable part of our business, and business to business, and building and construction and all that was that was our bread and butter. But in 2014, when I had sold the residential business, I did it because it was so low margin. Well, fast forward to 2020. 6 years later, and the world shut down. Well, where was most of the waste and recycling being generated? At home, because nobody was going out to eat or anything. So it was tough navigating that, right? So then it kind of gave me, I'll call it a re-energized look at, okay, maybe we don't do it in certain territories or under certain models, but we probably need to be at least somewhat diverse in there, and a portion of our revenue needs to be there because it's a steady. And that was the one good thing.
And it is recurring revenue, right? So.
It's recurring revenue, and the thing about it is it's very it's steady. There's always the need for a residential collection, and again, like, I never thought that a world pandemic would happen, and that the
oh, come on, Jason! I saw that coming a mile away.
I'm sure you did. I wish I would have known you.
I got off my cruise ship and was like, my kids are home for school for 2 weeks.
And so I would say that like anything, I made the right decision in getting rid of it at the time because it allowed me to scale. But then it ended up being, when I did my SWOT analysis, it ended up being a threat that I didn't project or see.
Sure.
Right. So, we really looked at it, and then, for the last 6 years, we kind of reevaluated. I had done a couple acquisitions where I acquired some residential collection companies. And it represented probably, by the time we sold, maybe about 10% of our overall business. So it wasn't like a huge
from like
portion.
30% to 0 back up to 10%.
10%, yeah.
So there's a little bit of diversification.
But it gave us some diversification and be able to weather another storm if it ever came, basically.
Yeah.
So
I want to go back for a minute to I think you hit something really important there for founders, which is like really breaking your business down into product lines and understanding your profitability and getting rid of the losers.
Yeah.
How much were you able to cash out from that divestiture?
Liquid cash or like overall sale?
Liquid cash.
Liquid cash, it probably put about $1.7 million worth of liquid cash into the business, which then I was able to use to, do certain things to scale, to buy certain equipment or anything. It wasn't a huge divestiture, but it was weird. I said to somebody once, I felt like somebody told me I had cancer, and I got rid of that part of the business, and it was literally like the next day they were like, "You're cured. You can go do what you've been trying to do because now you don't have this holding you back, right? This one
Yeah.
thing that you were holding on to because you loved the cash flow, it's now gone, but you have now the freedom to go to do whatever you needed to do, and that allowed us to scale. So,
Well, so that's what I want to talk about, right? Because there's a lot of freedom in freeing up capital to invest. I sometimes see people hesitate because they're like, I know I want to grow this business for an exit, but I don't have the capital. And you were able to get creative and come up with the capital. So then when you were like, I have this money and I can reinvest it, what sort of strategies did you consider doing with it?
it's a great question. The first thing, in order to try to identify it, what we did is I looked at all lines of business and where revenue was coming from, and then looked at like overall expenses of carrying costs and rents and all that. And I siloed every portion of the business so that I really understood where the profitability was coming from and what was driving profitability and what was not driving profitability. During that process, one of the things that we figured out is we really didn't know, and right, and what I
Yeah,
mean by
right.
that is we just didn't know, and that's kind of led me down a completely different path, which I don't know is on our agenda to talk about today. But like, I kind of at that point made a decision in like 2015, 2016 that we were in a very antiquated technology implemented industry. Like no one was
Sure.
using technology in our industry. And I basically said, well, listen, I don't own landfills. I own a transfer station, but I don't own landfills. And really at the end of the day, I'm probably never going to because of the cost to get into that. I have to be profitable prior to the post collection, pre-collection and post collection being disposal. And I was like, there's no way to measure anything. Like I don't know how I can measure profitability. So it led us down this crazy technology path. And the crazy part of that journey, I literally sat on a panel down at Turks and Caicos on Monday of last week. One of the reasons that that we got to the point where we were with the sale is I started to build out technology. I took that money that we got from the sale and built out a tech stack in our organization, as simple as making sure that the team can communicate better using, Microsoft Teams. And then from there, how did, our CRM talk to teams, and how did the sales process talk to operations and whatnot? So we did a lot of really innovative things in the industry, and we helped develop AI in the waste space. And we kind of helped develop the first, I can't use the term because somebody else has a trademark, but I developed the technology that they're using, but I would call it like the first smart garbage truck, basically. And, we took that money and invested it in the technology in order to have a better, clearer understanding. And then what happened was, once you started understanding where your profitability was, I was able to scale in certain areas that I didn't think were profitable before, but I just never had the data. I always thought that they were unprofitable, but then found out that they were profitable because I had, the metrics and the ability to record that stuff. So that was actually really cool. And, listen, I would look at it this way. We were mostly, and again, credit to my dad and my grandfather and the way they managed debt leading up to when I took the company over. We weren't carrying a ton of debt, but we were able to use that money that initially came back to finance probably the majority of the growth that happened with the tech stack, trying to add profitability and whatnot.
Yeah.
So we didn't really add a lot of debt. I mean, I think like any company, you carry debt. If you want to grow, you're going to carry debt.
Sure.
But we didn't add as a percentage of debt, even though we scaled, 4 times what we were. We didn't add the amount of debt to drag us down, basically. So.
Speak to the founder who's listening right now, who's like, everything you just said are resonating with them. I don't really have clarity into my operations. We're maybe an antiquated technology industry. Where would you tell them to start in the technology upgrade space?
That's a great question, because there's so much that's going on right now that, listen, I think you have to start with a customer service system that has the ability for operations and customer service to speak fluently with the customer, right? So that would be the biggest tech stack that I think you're going to get back the most return on. I don't know if it's going to help you specifically answer specific questions, but you need to start there, right? Because if you can't, you can never manage what you can't measure. And the only way you're going to measure it is to start getting some type of feedback back from your, if you're an HVAC guy or if you're a construction guy, having techs on site that are relaying that information through smartphones back to your back office. And then do you have the ability to use that information that's coming back in order to try to train people and to allow you to be more profitable on the next job on what you find. So like that's where we were utilizing it, right? Whereas we were capturing photos on customers that were, unprofitable because the containers were overloaded. That then would be brought back in. We would charge appropriately. And then that also allowed our sales teams, when they were going out to this similar type of customer, to be able to be trained based off of the data that we were gathering on other customers. So when I say it's a great question, there's so much that's out there. I would struggle to tell you exactly like, hey, do this one thing. What I would say is you probably have to really start digging into what is most important to you. Is it cash flow? Like, do you understand like how your payment terms are? Or if it's not cash flow, is it overtime? How are you tracking your employees? Or if it's not that, like it's your spend and your raw materials. So, you have to start somewhere. And what I would say is, I think the best thing,
start.
Just start. Yeah, exactly. Just start. Like, sometimes saying that you don't know and being vulnerable with your team that you don't know. I think sometimes as entrepreneurs and owners, we get stuck in this thing where like we're the guy.
We're the guy, yeah.
We're the guy.
We have the strategy.
No one else in the room.
We solve the problems.
Yeah, nobody else in the room is as smart as me. I guarantee you there's people that are smarter in the room. And if there's not, you're the problem. And that's what I would say. You're in your own way. You're the funnel, right? You're the neck at this point. And if you're not getting out of your own way and bringing smarter people in around you to give you better ideas, that's probably your first bet of why you're stalled and why you're not growing. Right. It took me realizing that like, wow, the family did a great job. I had to bring in better people that were around me, because the people that got me from I'll call it a $7 million company to a $10 million company weren't going to be the same people that were there when I was a $18 million company. And the people that got me from an $18 million company weren't going to be the same people that got me to a $30 million company. It's not, people don't want to hear that, especially if you're an entrepreneur, because they have people that are loyal, that are around them, and they feel guilty saying that to the people that have believed in them, that got them over those humps. But I promise you, it's not going to be the same people that are surrounding you. Doesn't mean that they're not great and they don't serve a purpose, but they're not going to be the same people once you get to a certain point. So what I would say is, as a founder, admit that you don't have the answer. Ask your team around you, and if nobody's bringing solutions, you probably have the wrong team around you.
Or you're leading them, you're killing all of their ideas, because they have ideas, they just don't feel safe.
Correct. You have to create an environment where they're willing to challenge you. Yeah. And listen, my thing was, I would always go into the room and say to my team, here's what I want to do. Everybody tell me why I'm wrong. Give me every reason why I'm wrong. We're going to go around the room. And if I'm still wrong at the end, then we're going to reevaluate it. But if not, this is the way we're going, and this is what we're doing. Because ultimately, it falls on your shoulders at the end of the day. You have to pay the bank, and you have to do all those things. But listen, I think sometimes that's probably the biggest flaw that I've seen, like in my peer groups and Vistage groups and everything, is that a lot of people think, well, I've been doing this for 20 years. I know better. Well, yeah, maybe you're also, jaded by the things that have happened. They've gotten you here, and that's why you're in the same spot. Right?
Or what I see happen sometimes too with the leaders I work with is they'll say that, go around, here's my idea, tell me why I'm wrong. And then somebody comes back to them and says, well, here's why I think you're wrong. And they're like, no, I've already thought of that. They like shut them down.
Well, listen, I don't want to, I certainly don't want to blast my family, because they are super successful. But I think a lot of times, my brother was sitting here, he would absolutely agree with me. My dad was very hard-headed and very set in his ways, and it took a lot to convince him. And I know one of the things we're going to talk about today is what my exit strategy was. But part of that was putting together a strategic plan, right? So we probably started 10 years before that we were going to sell, putting a plan together.
2014, you divest had you started before that, or you were like, let's do this divestiture and then we'll put together the plan?
So we did the divestiture, and during that divestiture, the purchaser had asked that we sign a right of first refusal if we sold again, and I didn't want to do that, so I did a right of first offer instead. Originally, they wanted it, a right of first refusal. I said no. They said, well, we'll give you how about a right of first offer, and we won it for 10 years, and I accepted it at the time, and with the intent going like in 10 years, I always had this goal that I was going to be retired by the time I was 50. And I don't know if it was a healthy goal or not, because I sometimes, worked a little crazy, but the good news is I'm 48 today, and I'm retired. So,
All right.
So I beat the goal. Right. But, what I did at that point was I said, okay, it was 2014. I'm going to put a 10-year goal out there. Our mutual friend, Bill Anderson, I had hired him to come in and run a strategic planning session with us. And, the first time we did it, I would say the management team didn't even really, I don't want to say get engaged. They were just like, what is this? Right? Like, what are we doing here? And
because again, you're taking the professionalism of this company up a level where they're like, we've never done this before.
Correct. Right. Yeah. And the thing I would say is it was profound. And if anybody's listening, the two pieces of advice that I would give is, if you're the owner, shut your mouth and sit back and listen to the people that are in the room. Don't talk. Number one, don't talk. And with that, go into the day you making the statement, guys, we're equals here today. Anybody can say whatever they want here today, because this is about us spending one day working on the business, not working in the business, right? And if you can do that, I don't know that it's going to happen your first strategic plan, right? I think by the time you do your second and third, and I think your responsibility as the owner is to leave that meeting and have accountability check-ins, right? So we basically build out a 1-year plan, a 3-year plan, a 5-year plan, and a 10-year plan. And my goal on the 1 year was to set up monthly check-ins, just with everybody saying like, hey, this is what we agreed we were going to do this year, and where are we kind of at? And a lot of people now, I think, refer to that to EOS. I've never used EOS. I just kind of did it on my own. But, and I think the amazing thing was, once the team had buy-in, because part of the buy-in from the team has to be that they believe where you're going and that they gave input and insight to it. So when we sat around the room, we started talking about like, what are our core values? What's our mission? Like, what are we trying to do? Like, it's all feel-good stuff, right? But if I said to you, what's important to you at the end of the day? Like, for me, as the CEO or president, it's safety. I want to make sure everybody goes home every day. What does it mean to you? Like, what's really important to you? And you do that exercise, and then you come up with like core things that are, okay, this is the 12 things on like how we operate as a company. And as the owner, you then take from that meeting and start following up with people. Like, one of the things we did is we had built cards, and we put their strategic values on them. And every month I would focus on one of those core values. So when we'd had our managers meetings, I'd say, guys, we're going to talk about, what does safety mean? What does integrity mean? And by the way, I didn't come up with these. These were your solutions and suggestions, right? And I did that from a standpoint that the strategic plan for the exit that I was trying to build involved my people and involved my people's ideas, because there was no way I was going to get to where I wanted to be if they didn't buy in, right? So I think the first year it was more around more cultural things, like what's important to us. Like, yeah, we want to be profitable, but like, how do we want to get there? What does that look like? Because now, if these are really the 12 things that we hold dear to the employees that are here, we can now hold people accountable for us not hitting milestones along the way. Because if somebody's not on time, if somebody's not properly dressed, somebody doesn't look the appearance that we're looking for, it doesn't meet our goal. So now I could then, as the owner, push that back down and say, you guys said this was important. Manage your people, right? Because if you don't manage your people properly, we're never going to get to where we need to be. So I think the first year it was a little bit of a fluff type of thing. And I mean that sincerely, not in a bad way, but like, it was just trying to figure out what it was. But then once they realized that we were going to continue to do this every year and, hold actionable things, we actually had set out for 10 goals in our 5-year plan, and we hit all of them in 18 months.
Like what? What were your goals? Do you remember?
I have to remember. I have to go back and pull up the meeting minutes, but like one of them was to open a transfer station. One of them was to have. It's a really hard process to get your hauling license in the state of New Jersey. You have to go through FBI background checks and stuff like that. So it was to have operations in New Jersey. It was to have a satellite operating situation, have a transfer station, have I'm trying to remember the fifth one was about being like a good place to work, being recognized by the peers as a good place to work. Don't give me the whole list. You're putting me on my
Sure,
spot.
no, that's fine.
But that was all laid out by the team. It wasn't me. But I knew if we could hit those 10 things that the team was trying to do, that ultimately that was going to get me to the 10-year plan where I was trying to exit and trying to put it all together. So by the time we did like our third or fourth one, I mean, the company had like...
You do these once a year?
Yeah, we would do it once a year in November.
Mm-hmm.
I tried to do it before the end of the year and tried to do it, in a time frame where we could then reevaluate it in January. Because I think people's mindsets just kind of work that way, like where
Sure.
they look at like, okay, how did we finish the year out? And then what do we have to do to get after it next year type of thing. And, the other thing, so I said that the one thing was get out of your own way, shut your mouth and let your team talk, right? That's number one. But number two, I was do it offsite. Do not do it. And I'm not saying you have to go crazy and spend a ton of money to get, but do it somewhere that's neutral ground, right? You don't want to be anywhere that there's distractions. And it doesn't have to be like anything crazy. I think a couple times we did it at country clubs. We did it at the Pyramid Club downtown in Philly once or twice. But I got to tell you, the thing that it also did probably by the second or third one is it, for new managers or new team members, they were like, what's this all about? But then the people that were there that had gone through it a couple times, they were like, no, man, this is what we do. This is our culture. This is what we do. And it would get the managers like really psyched up about like, this is where we're going. And I think, when you put everybody in a room as like equals like that, and everybody has an input, and the guy that normally reports to somebody doesn't have any more say than anybody else, or even myself sitting in the room, I was like, listen, guys, I'm on the sidelines today. Bill Anderson is the one running this meeting. This is Bill's meeting. I'm just
a spectator.
I'm a spectator here. I'm here to hear what you guys think we're doing really well or what we're doing really bad. And I think that was, I don't want to call it the secret sauce.
So like how many people are in these meetings?
So I went senior level, mid-level, and then the fifth and sixth year, I actually went down to like supervisory level. So I think the most we ever had in the room was probably like 20, 25, right? But I think originally it was probably 10-ish. And then we probably got into like maybe the 18 and then like 20, 25 people. And my next goal actually was, okay, we have the managers in the room, but why don't we have the like frontline people in the room? I was actually going to bring frontline people into the room, but I think that then gets difficult because there's become a complaining session versus a constructive where we go in session, right? So I didn't do that, but that was my next goal, and I was going to try to get to there. But listen, we were able to reach basically our 10-year plan in about 7 years. We did our 3-year plan. We did in about 18 months. And listen, I think the other thing I would say is not many entrepreneurs or small businesses are literally taking a step back and saying, what's the plan to get there? I mean, it's like being on a diet, right? Like if you don't weigh yourself, you don't know where you're at. You don't know what your goals are. You don't, how many times did I get to the gym? Are you tracking that? Like, what are you doing? And if you don't put a plan together, you're not going to get there. And I think some people just get stuck in the minutia and the routine of every day of just running their business. And they don't think about where do I want to get to? And do I want to make it attractive to a buyer?
So you did the divestiture. You went back to a $7 million company. Then you sat down a year or two later, started doing your strategy sessions. Where did you think you would get in 10 years? Like, what was the target?
My target for the 10 was I wanted to be a $50 million enterprise valuation when we sold. That's what I wanted to be. Right?
And what would
at
that
the time,
translate?
that was lofty at the time, right?
Yeah.
Because I was a $7 million company when we started that, right? So,
not quite 10x, but not far off.
Yeah, right. So that was my goal. And like when we finally exited, I don't know if I'm allowed to say, but we ended up being about 22 times EBITDA and about 2.8 times revenue on roughly a $30 million company. So you can do the math. I'm not going to come out and say what it was.
Yeah, but you beat your 50 million.
I beat my 50 million, right? So now listen, some of that
at
has
7 years, that was at 10 years.
that was at 7 years.
Okay, all right.
So I beat the 10-year plan even, right? So like my goal was always to try to get an exit upwards of that to be able to, listen, part of that is because I had to service debt. I had to do other things.
Sure.
Certainly didn't walk away with all that. I wish, make sure the IRS knows that. No.
Well, and I appreciate you talking numbers because I was telling you on the way in, I had a friend who went through this, VC-backed sale and in the tech space. And I remember him saying at the time, like, this is such a black hole. Nobody talks about it. And then afterwards, there's NDAs or founders are just like in PTSD. And like, I just don't want to think about it.
Yeah,
so it's good to know what the realities look like.
Yeah, and what
it
I
can
would,
look like.
Yeah, listen, and that's what we're here to talk about is what the 5-year plan looks like. Part of that 5-year plan is you have to have your financials tightened down, right? And if you're like, oh, I'm going to sell my business in 2 years, you better start planning at 5 years to have it marketable in 2, because what I can tell you is the process from the time that we engaged our, sell side advisor, the investment bank, to getting it sold, because you have to interview investment banks. Not all investment banks are created equal. Equal.
Yeah, I thought you were going to say
evil. I did see that. That was a Freudian slip, right? That was a Freudian slip. But seriously, they're not all created equal, and just the process of vetting out who's going to represent your company, that can be challenging in and of itself. I mean, I think that process probably took me 6 months. Mm-hmm. So from the time we basically said, hey, we're going to sell the company, go through the process, it was probably 2 to 2.5 years from the time we decided it was ready to do it. Mm-hmm. Right.
And you began 7 years before
that. Right. And again, that's what I would say is I think the process that you really have to understand is it's not as simple as just being like, I'm going to sell the business right now. If you're doing that, you are not maximizing your ability to get every dollar that you put into it out of it. Right. Mm-hmm. And I think that if anything is going to resonate with anybody who's an entrepreneur or a business owner is there's no amount of money that someone could pay you for your company that could potentially make right the fact that you gave up dinner with your kids on a Thursday night because you were trying to scale your business, or that you were spending time with your family members. Like I myself, I used to joke all the time, like I had never enjoyed a Christmas in my entire life because the busiest 2 days of the year for us are Christmas and the day after Christmas, because the amount of trash that's produced at Christmas time is insane, right? And everybody would want off. And for me, it was very stressful. I'm not sure there was any amount of money that a buyer could have paid me to give me back the 25 Christmases that I missed with my family, where even though I was there, I wasn't present.
Yeah.
So what I would say to everybody is you're never going to get the money that you lost giving up personal things to get you where you're at. You might as well make sure that you maximize every dollar by having a plan in order to get the sale across the end line. Mm-hmm. And I think the one thing that I would tell anybody that's going to walk the path is, people called me to pick up their trash because I was an expert in doing that. If I need a roofer, you don't call me. I call a roofer. If you're going to sell your business, why do you think you're qualified to represent yourself in a transaction? You're not. You want to talk to somebody that's all they do for a living, who's processed hundreds, if not thousands, of deals that have walked that path and know every bump that's in front of you. And
it's the single most significant transaction
you'll ever do.
So get an advisor.
Without a doubt. Yeah.
What surprised you about the sale process? Like moving into the sale process. So divested 7 years, you set a 10-year plan out, you hit it in 7 years. Basically the 10-year plan was like, let's get this ready to sell, right? Mm-hmm. So now you're like, I've hit those targets and it's time to start thinking about selling. Mm-hmm. And you enter into that process. You said it took like 2.5 years. Mm-hmm. What surprised you about the sale process that founders potentially underestimate? Or
the buyer, no matter who it is going to try to use deal fatigue to, one, they're going to throw a big number out in front of you to get you to bite. But once you bite, they're going to use everything they possibly can to chip away at that initial offer price. And then they're going to use deal fatigue in order to try to come in at the last minute and shave 10 to 15% off the purchase price.
I have heard this many times. So I don't think this is unique to your story.
No. And if I was going to give anybody any advice, it would be hold strong to your dates. So listen, we used an investment bank out of Alabama. Shout out to Founders. I'm not trying to plug anybody, but they did a great job. Dennis and his team down there, they represented us, and they did a fantastic job. But I think in retrospect, the one things I would have done is I let the buyer extend the diligence period longer than one I was comfortable for and with. And it got to the point where they would have continued to keep doing it because they were trying to use deal fatigue, and they had never come back in and tried to shave the price in any way, but they were trying to use deal fatigue to at least negotiate things that they wanted in the contract, because it was going on a year, and I was basically running point on all of those transactions. We had, and I think I mentioned this earlier, but we had 7 companies that were as part of the transaction. There was real estate holding companies, there was the transfer station, there was a compactor leasing, a national sales company, and then also the waste hauling company. So we had a total of 7 companies, and that's a lot to manage in a transaction. It was a very complex transaction. So the buyer, I think, was trying to utilize, and I don't want to talk bad about the buyer from a standpoint. They actually treated me fantastic throughout the entire transition. I don't have a problem with them, but listen, it's part of their structure of why they're successful, is that they want to drag it out.
It's part of the game.
It's part of the game. They want to make it so that you just say, when they come back in and say, well, this is what we want from a negotiating point, that you just go, whatever, and it benefits them. Whereas, we kind of just got to a point where, we said, listen, we're not going to extend it, and if the deal doesn't happen, we're walking away. And I don't know that they're necessarily used to that, because most people don't do that. Most people get so tired, because I think by the time most people decide to sell their business, they're already tired.
Yeah.
Then they go through this, process where they're exhausted now, because all they've done is work on trying to get it done, even with people advising. And it's taken their mind off of the ball of what they're actually doing as a business. So they're not performing like they would have before. The business is going flat now because their eyes not on the ball and everything. And listen, I know even a couple friends who have gotten to the point where they were at closing and they came back in and said, well, we're going to shave the price by 10% because of this. And they just went with it because they were like, I can't imagine going through another 18-month process or another 12-month process. I just don't want to do it. So I would say, the one benefit that we had is we had an investment bank being the advisor through that process, and they didn't let a lot of that happen. But even with them not allowing it to happen, it still crept in.
Some of it still
it crept in, right? So, and I think that's probably why it's most important to make sure that you have understanding of when and how you want to sell, because I think most people get to a point when they're ready to sell. They're either underperforming financially, or they're physically tired because they were doing 15 things and their one key person quit, and they're just like, I just don't want to do this anymore, right? So I think the one thing you have to think about is, when do you want to do it, and what's it look like when you go to do it? And then if you want to really maximize it, you have to focus on still running your business. You can't be focused on the sale. You have to have other people that are representing you for that standpoint. The other thing I would say, not to cut you off real quick, but the other thing I would say that I was not prepared for is the legal counsel costs and what I would call the ancillary costs to prepare the business for sale. Because if you really and maybe it was
Can
because
you put a ballpark number on that for listeners? For you guys, you're like $30 million company roughly at this point.
It was probably about a 3% total of, and that's not including like fees to the investment bank. I'm talking like, these are just fees for attorneys to. And the one piece of advice,
is that on the sale price?
Yeah.
On your revenue. So that's
on the revenue price, on our like our operating revenue, not on the sale price. Okay. But what I would say is,
so
Yeah. You had it, and you got it right in there. About $900K is probably what we spent. Now I say that from a standpoint that the other thing that I would say is, and attorneys are made to protect you, and you don't want them to not do their job. But I think you have to be very clear with whoever your counsel is. M&A attorneys are not cheap. Tax attorneys are not cheap. You have to set the standard very early in the process of what the expected close date is, and hold people accountable. And if they're not getting there, you have to hold them accountable, right? Because think about it this way: an M&A attorney is not incentivized to actually close the deal. He's incentivized
To bill you.
to bill you, right? And that creep can really cut into your overall profitability of the sale when it's all said and done. So I would just advise anybody that is going to do it, make sure you have a reputable company. Number one, it doesn't come cheap, but make sure that you understand what the expectations and the cost of that are and hold people accountable.
Jason, thank you so much for your time
Yeah,
today. I
yeah.
know I'm keeping you from
No,
sunny
no,
Clearwater,
listen, no.
Florida,
Yeah.
in cold, rainy Philadelphia. But I
Listen, I'm
deeply
always
appreciate
going to be a Philly true and true guy, but I got to tell you, when I go to Florida, I feel a lot better.
it. Agreed.
You know, somebody said, "Where do you live now?" And I said, "I'm in Clearwater, but I'm from Philly." Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
like, I'm always going to be from Philly. So.
Yes, exactly. Well,
But
thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you for your time. Thank you for making a wonderful day. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you as well.
Take care.
This is the 5-Year Exit with Beka Shea. Thanks for listening. And if you're interested in learning more about how we help CEOs and founders build great leadership teams that can work without them, go ahead and book a call with us. We'd love to talk more.